hi guys, welcome back to another Sons of Purpose podcast. I'm here, my name's Akira, I'm here with my co-hosts Diego and Fran, and today we're going to be discussing topics related to mental health, mental stability, and depression. These are all issues very common, especially within our age group. We are taking the IB diploma, which is very difficult and rigorous, especially in this troubling time between childhood and adulthood. And I wanted to talk about this issue and how depression relates to this. So Fran, what are your thoughts?
Well, as you mentioned, not only for the IB, but overall I think it is natural that students feel pressure upon their responsibilities, This may vary between each person, because some parents might impose certain responsibility or expectations, which this pressure might sometimes be unnatural to a certain extent, which might definitely affect their self-esteem, because for some people, I think if their parents have these high expectations of them, if they don't perform on an exam or something doesn't happen the way they intended to, because this expectation affects their sense of self, because at the end of the day, they only feel sufficient if they reach those expectations. So if they underperform, this might severely affect their self-esteem, And I think this is something that could be avoided. This can also be affected by culture, because there's some countries that highly prioritize academic prowesses over other things, But still, it is objectively not healthy for parents to impose this responsibility. And also, there might be some people that put that expectation within themselves, and they center their self-esteem on what they do on school.
I feel like also parents tend to focus too much on grades rather than an improvement, Because for me, my personal opinion or my personal experience, my mom always told me, you have to get the best grades. But what about a day you get a bad grade and then you improve the other day? But if for your mom it's not the best grade, you will still feel bad about yourself and you will not be able to see your improvement. I feel like that's certain things that maybe are small, when added up, really affect your self-esteem, because you do not value your effort, even if it's small or big, because you didn't accomplish something that someone else told you to.
And so going back to what Fran said about the culture, I think that's a really important point, because I've lived in 3 different countries in my life. I've lived in New Zealand, China, and now in El Salvador, and the culture has been different in each and every one, and it's changed how I view schooling and my grades and how I interact with teachers, with classmates, et cetera, all that stuff. And so the main example of this would be in China, where people are very school-focused, very grade-focused. They spend a lot of time studying. If they do poorly on a test, they're very criticized. They view less of themselves. They think themselves as worse or inferior, and which is different to the culture here in El Salvador, where people are more accepting or less judging of poor grades and understand that it's not everything in life. And so I think that depending on the culture, depression because of school can change.
I can definitely see what you're saying, because our school has, I think, a decent amount of international students. And I do think that you can tell the way they were raised, because we have, people from New Zealand. We also have Asian kids, European kids, and the way they see academic responsibilities definitely varies between, based on their cultural background.
And then how they respond to that also varies.
It's totally different.
Yeah, for example, in my case, my parents they've always wanted me to be a very responsible and disciplined person, but they have not been severely critical on me. It might be, it's not like I'm want to show off or anything, but I've always had high grades, very good grades, and in a way they're used to it. But still, even when I haven't been able to perform, I have always been resilient on that, because I something I do value of our school is that they always like value the effort and progress. It's not just like they don't only see us as numbers, right? So me having been a student of that school since I was very young, I think that mentality has been like integrated into my brain, you know. But there's also people, for example, I remember you were not here, but I think you got to know him. There was a Chinese kid in our class, yeah. I remember he used to get stressed, even with teachers, for not performing in class, you know, and that's definitely because, objectively, I would say Asian culture, like at least Eastern Asian countries, are very critical on
Yes.
academic prowess, and I think that is, I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that that might be reflected statistically, because those countries, like I think Japan specifically, has high rates of depression on its population, and apart from academic like pressures, you know, I do feel like that culture is like greatly values your worth as a whole, as a group, and usually tends not to pay attention to yourself as an individual, you know, which might not always be the best, I would say, because at least in Latin America, I think we have a good sense of community, right? And it's something very interesting, I think, because at the end of the day, what might be stressful for you might not be stressful for someone else, and vice versa.
But I feel like also our culture is like really independent, because those cultures like really like, I don't know how to say, but collective, like as a group they value it. So you're seen in in your family group, even though you're a member of it, you have to earn something in that group, you know. However, in like our culture, like in Latin American culture, you tend to like go away from your family in a certain point of your life, and pursuing your own dreams. That in other cultures is not as common. They tell you what to do. They say, "Oh, you have to study this, you have to study that," because that is what's going to get you economical stability, or that's what's going to get you far in life. But it's not always like that.
Yeah, they have like pre-established ideas of your plans on the future and what they want you to achieve. Yeah.
It's also the way the cultures are set up as well. So, for example, in China, they've got something called the Gaokao, which is like the exams that you take after, like, in your final years of high school, and that like determines like your status in life. Basically, if you score highly, you get to a good university. You get a good university, you get a good job. If you perform poorly, you go to like a poor university, or you don't go at all, then you end up with like a low class job that diminishes you in terms of society's perception of you, and so there's a lot of stress in people to perform according to like societal notions of having to perform well, and it's places a lot of pressure on the students and leads to high rates of suicidality as well.
Yeah, it's really linked at self-esteem with suicide, because when you do not have self-worth, or when people like tend to not give you as much value, that affects you, that affects your self-esteem, and that leads to higher suicide rates in the country. We can see that. I don't know if I don't know the exact data, but I know that Asian cultures have a high suicide rate, right?
I think so.
Yeah, definitely. And what I said previously, it's also due to like their perception of society being, I don't know, they really value the result, not the process, if we use that analogy.
Yeah.
And based on that, people, I would say cold. They're cold with each other. Because when a foreigner, I don't know if you, when you initially came, I don't know if you could tell that difference, because you came from China to El Salvador. It's
Yes.
completely 180-degree change, you know? I don't know if you notice like the way people might greet you on the street even if you're a stranger. Apparently, that's not that common in other parts of the world. For example, I've been to the Netherlands recently, and despite that they're not excluding you, but they won't talk to you unless you do so. But in these parts of the world, it is very common for people to be very inclusive. But I would say, like, in the parts of the world where that's not the case and they're exclusive, you are basically dealing with your problems by yourself. And that's, I would say, is a very big problem, because usually people, when first of all, depression is a constant and frequent state, a frequent negative state of mind, which has symptoms such as sadness, and there's also like physical like sequels such as not being hungry, not like insomnia, and there's also like increased heartbeat. But it turns to be depression once it is constant. So this, I would say that I am very like in favor of therapy. I do believe in therapy, and even if it's not like explicitly with a psychologist, even talking with someone you trust, that helps you deal with it. But if a culture has imposed to you since you were little to deal with everything by your own, on your own, that I would say it's natural for like those statistics to increase compared to other places where they value the sense of community.